Every case leaves a trace, a name, a date, a question that was never answered. This is Silent Shadows. On a cold Monday morning in December, Dorothy Arnold left her family's Manhattan home on what sounded like a completely ordinary errand. She was 25 years old, independently minded, and well known within New York society. She planned to find a dress for her younger sister's upcoming social debut. A few hours later, a friend saw her on Fifth Avenue. Dorothy seemed calm. She spoke about meeting for lunch. Then she walked away and disappeared. There was no obvious moment of danger. No witness reported seeing Dorothy forced into a carriage or pulled from the street. She did not leave behind a note explaining that she wanted to begin a new life. Instead, the last confirmed pieces of her day were almost painfully mundane: a box of chocolates, a newly purchased book, and a brief conversation with someone who had no reason to think anything was wrong. Now here's where the case becomes even more difficult. Dorothy's family did not immediately tell the police that she was missing. For weeks they tried to conceal her disappearance from the public, from the newspapers, and even from parts of their own social circle. By the time authorities became fully involved, the trail was cold, memories were beginning to shift, and New York had carried on around the space where Dorothy had been. Dorothy Harriet Camille Arnold belonged to a wealthy and socially prominent family. Her father, Francis Arnold, was an established importer, and the family lived on East 79th Street in Manhattan. Their world placed enormous value on reputation. Social standing influenced friendships, marriages, and business relationships. Public scandal could cling to an entire household, especially when the person at the center of it was an unmarried young woman. Dorothy had attended Bryn Mawr College and wanted to become a writer. She submitted short stories to magazines. But her efforts had not brought the success she hoped for. Members of her family reportedly regarded her literary ambitions with skepticism. That tension matters, not because it explains her disappearance, but because it offers a glimpse of the private frustrations she may have carried beneath an otherwise privileged and carefully managed life. On December 12, 1910, Dorothy told her mother that she was going shopping for a dress for her younger sister Marjorie's debut. She left home late that morning carrying a muff and wearing clothing appropriate for the winter weather. She did not take a large amount of luggage. She did not announce plans to travel. Nothing about the way she departed suggested that she expected to be gone for more than a few hours. Her first known stop was Park and Tilford, an upscale shop where she purchased a small box of chocolates. Dorothy charged the purchase to the family account, an ordinary thing for her to do. That detail would later be checked and repeated because it anchored her movements to a real location. At that point, she was moving through familiar streets in broad daylight, surrounded by clerks, shoppers, drivers, and pedestrians. Dorothy then visited Brentano's bookshop. There she bought a collection of humorous essays called Engaged Girl Sketches. Again, this did not look like the action of someone preparing to vanish forever. She used the family account and took the book with her. The purchase created another firm point in the timeline, but it also gave the case its haunting final image: Dorothy walking out of a bookshop and back into the city. Shortly before 2 o'clock that afternoon, Dorothy encountered a friend named Gladys King on Fifth Avenue. The two women stopped and spoke. According to Gladys, Dorothy appeared completely normal. She did not seem frightened, ill, or emotionally distressed. They discussed the possibility of meeting again for lunch. It was casual future planning, the sort of conversation that usually disappears from memory because nobody realizes it may become a final goodbye. Dorothy said she intended to walk home through Central Park. Then she and Gladys separated. This is the last broadly accepted sighting of Dorothy Arnold. After that, the record simply ends. Whether she actually entered the park is unknown. No reliable witness saw her there, and no confirmed account placed her on the route back to East 79th Street. Somewhere after that conversation, certainty gives way to speculation, so let's pause and picture the setting. Fifth Avenue in 1910 was busy, but it was not monitored in the modern sense. There were no security cameras following a person from block to block. A witness might remember an unusual incident, but a young woman walking alone would not necessarily attract attention. Dorothy could move through a crowd and become effectively invisible without anyone realizing that her movements would later matter. When Dorothy failed to return for dinner, concern began to grow inside the Arnold home. She also had plans that evening and did not appear for them. The family contacted friends, but they did not immediately describe the full situation. Callers were reportedly given explanations, suggesting Dorothy was unavailable or unwell. Protecting her reputation appears to have shaped the family's response almost from the first night. The Arnolds searched Dorothy's room for clues. They examined her belongings and correspondence, looking for evidence of a secret journey, a planned meeting, or some private crisis. There was no clear farewell message. Her clothing and personal possessions did not indicate a carefully organized departure. If Dorothy had chosen to leave voluntarily, she had done so without the preparations that usually make that theory easier to support. Rather than contacting the police publicly, the family turned to a lawyer and private investigators. Quiet inquiries began at hospitals, hotels, and other places where a missing woman might have gone. Morgues were checked as well. The family feared not only that Dorothy had been harmed, but that publicity could create scandal, gossip, and false reports. Their caution was understandable within their social world, but it came at a serious investigative cost. Those early days were the best chance to identify someone who had noticed Dorothy after she left Gladys King. A shop clerk, carriage driver, streetcar conductor, or park employee might have remembered her while the encounter was fresh. Instead, the search operated largely in private. The public was not shown her photograph. And ordinary New Yorkers were not asked to think back to that Monday afternoon until weeks had passed. Investigators explored whether Dorothy had left New York by train or ship. Passenger lists and transportation records were examined, as were reports from hotels and medical facilities. Private detectives followed possible sightings beyond the city, but Dorothy's appearance was not so unusual that every report could be trusted. Once a missing person's image circulates, sincere witnesses often identify strangers who merely share a similar face, coat, posture, or hairstyle. The possibility of voluntary disappearance received close attention. Dorothy was an adult. She had literary ambitions and may have felt constrained by her family's expectations. She also had personal relationships that her relatives did not necessarily approve of. Could she have walked away to escape that pressure? It is possible in the abstract, but there was never confirmed evidence showing that she established a new identity, accessed hidden money, or contacted someone who helped her leave. One relationship drew particular scrutiny. Dorothy had been close to George Griscom Jr., a man she knew socially and with whom she had corresponded. He was outside New York when she vanished. Members of the Arnold family questioned him and examined whether he knew more than he admitted. His connection to Dorothy fueled rumors, but no reliable evidence established that he arranged her disappearance or met her in Manhattan that afternoon. There were also questions about a previous trip Dorothy had made to Boston. Investigators wondered whether that journey reflected an attempt to meet someone privately or deal with a personal problem away from her family. Over time, the trip became attached to darker theories involving pregnancy or a secret medical procedure. Those ideas have been repeated for decades, but repetition is not proof. No medical record or verified witness conclusively linked such a procedure to Dorothy's disappearance. By early January, the family's private strategy was failing. Investigators had found no dependable trace of Dorothy, and maintaining the appearance that nothing was wrong became increasingly difficult. Friends were asking questions, rumors were spreading. Every additional day also made it less likely that a useful witness could remember an exact time, location, or detail from the afternoon of December 12th. On January 25, 1911, more than 6 weeks after Dorothy vanished, the disappearance was finally announced publicly. Newspapers seized on the story. A wealthy young society woman had disappeared from one of the busiest parts of New York after buying chocolates and a book. The contrast was irresistible to the press: privilege and safety on one side, complete uncertainty on the other. Publicity produced a flood of reported sightings. Women believed to be Dorothy were seen in cities across the United States. Other reports placed her in Europe. Investigators checked trains, ships, hospitals, hotels, boarding houses, and institutions. Each lead required time, and most dissolved under basic scrutiny. The woman had the wrong age, the wrong history, or could be conclusively identified as someone else. None could be verified as Dorothy. Police also confronted a practical problem created by the delay. They could reconstruct Dorothy's shopping route only through the witnesses and transactions still available. Her purchases were confirmed. Gladys King's encounter remained central. But the most important section of the journey, from Fifth Avenue towards Central Park and home, contained no confirmed steps at all. Investigators could search the park, but they could not establish that Dorothy had entered it. Could she have suffered a sudden accident? New York streets, transit systems, waterways, and construction sites all presented hazards. Hospitals and morgues were checked, including records involving unidentified patients and bodies. Yet Dorothy's clothing, social prominence, and widely circulated description should eventually have helped produce an identification. No confirmed accident victim matched her. Even so, the absence of a match could not completely eliminate the possibility. Suicide was another theory, especially because Dorothy had experienced disappointment in her writing ambitions. Some observers imagined that she might have entered the park, reached the river, or found another secluded location. But there was no suicide note and no recovered body. Personal disappointment alone is not evidence of suicidal intent. The theory survived because the case offered so little physical information, not because investigators found a decisive fact supporting it. Then there was the possibility of violence. Dorothy may have agreed to meet someone she knew, or she may have encountered a stranger after leaving Fifth Avenue. Yet daylight abduction from a crowded district would have carried a high risk of witnesses. A planned meeting is easier to imagine, but no appointment was proven. No sign of a struggle, ransom demand, or physical evidence ever emerged to establish a crime scene. Dorothy's father publicly expressed the belief that his daughter was dead. He rejected the idea that she had simply abandoned the family and remained alive somewhere under another name. His certainty may have reflected what he knew about her personality, or it may have been the conclusion of a parent unable to imagine prolonged silence. Either way, belief was not evidence, and investigators still had no body and no confirmed account of her final movements. Years passed, but claims continued. In 1916, a prisoner asserted that he had helped bury Dorothy's body after she died under suspicious circumstances. The story suggested that others had secretly disposed of her remains. Authorities investigated, including locations connected to the account, but found nothing that verified it. The prisoner's statement produced headlines, not proof. No remains, personal objects, or independent witnesses tied the claim to Dorothy. That pattern repeated throughout the case. Someone would report seeing Dorothy alive. Another person would claim knowledge of her death. A theory would briefly appear to explain the silence, the family's secrecy, or her relationships. Then the supporting details would fail. Without physical evidence, each account depended on memory, rumor, or the credibility of people who sometimes had clear reasons to seek attention. The Arnold family's initial secrecy remains one of the most debated parts of the story. It is easy to judge their decision from a modern perspective. But their fear of scandal was real within the culture they inhabited. Still, the consequences were substantial. They traded a rapid public search for discretion. By the time Dorothy's face appeared in newspapers, anyone who had passed her on the street had lived through more than a month of other faces in ordinary days, and that may be the central tragedy of the investigation. Dorothy vanished in a city filled with people. Yet the search began as though her disappearance could be contained inside the family home. The Arnolds had money, private detectives, lawyers, and social influence. What they did not have was time. Once those first hours and days were gone, wealth could fund inquiries, but it could not recreate an unnoticed encounter on a winter afternoon. There's also something unsettling about Dorothy's last known purchase. Engaged Girl Sketches was light reading connected to courtship and social life. Some later writers treated the title as if it contained a hidden clue. More likely, it was simply a book that interested her. In unresolved cases, ordinary objects can begin to look symbolic because we know what happened afterward. Dorothy, of course, had no reason to see the purchase that way. More than a century later, the broad possibilities remain unchanged. Dorothy may have left voluntarily and successfully concealed her identity. She may have died by suicide or accident in a way that prevented recognition. She may have been killed by someone she knew or encountered after speaking with Gladys. Every possibility has weaknesses, and none has the evidence required to move it from theory to conclusion. What remains certain is remarkably limited. On December 12, 1910, Dorothy Arnold left home to shop for her sister's dress. She bought chocolates. She bought a book. Shortly before 2 o'clock, she spoke with a friend on Fifth Avenue and said she would walk home through Central Park. She never arrived. Her family waited weeks before making the disappearance public, and every major search that followed ended without a confirmed trace. So the last reliable moment is not a scream, a struggle, or a dramatic farewell. It is two friends parting on a busy Manhattan street, casually expecting there would be another lunch. Dorothy turns away carrying her purchases and continues into the afternoon. After that, there are investigations, rumors, and theories, but no answer. The city kept moving, and Dorothy Arnold was never conclusively seen again. If this case stayed with you, there are others waiting. Subscribe to Silent Shadows and walk with us into the next one.